Our guests today are Tom Stewart and Patricia O'Connell, and we're going to talk to them about their book, Woo, Wow, and Win, Service Design, Strategy, and the Art of Customer Delight. Tom and Patricia, thank you so much for joining us today on Knowledge at Wharton.
Oh, thank you for having us.
Delighted to be here, McCool.
Great. Well, maybe we can start with you, Patricia, with the first question. What inspired you to write this book?
I confess I had never heard of service design until 4 years ago. And I was working with a client at the Savannah College of Art and Design, and they started talking about service design classes. And I said, what's that? And they said, service design is when we teach people how to imagine and think through and then design a customer experience. They said people think about user experience. There's been a lot of emphasis on user experience because of all the emphasis on things going online. But they said when you walk into a restaurant, you walk into a hotel, you interact with a company, you go into the lobby of a business, every step of that interaction between you and that company, that brand, that business, needs to be designed in order to give you a satisfactory customer experience. And I thought, this is absolutely fascinating. And I started looking around, and I realized that there was not a lot written on that for the service market. There's a lot about design from manufacturing. And I realized that there was really a gap here to connect the idea of service to strategy, and that's part of where Tom came in.
And what inspired me to write the book was Patricia, obviously. No, but seriously, one of the things that's really interesting is when you think about it, and particularly in service businesses, and you know that a lot of what we know about management comes from automobile assembly plants and Deming and Frederick Taylor and all of that. But when it comes to a service, these things need to be, can be, should be designed as carefully as products are. And when you think about it, this is the strategy connection. That's the differentiation, really. And more studies are starting to show this, that the differentiation is not the product or the service per se. It's not price. It's the experience you have, what it's like to go into that restaurant, what it's like to work with that law firm. And it goes from B2B to B2C in all areas. And it also connects to what it's like to go to that auto dealership. And that what it's like, I mean, that's the strategic point. And by the way, that's really hard to copy. I can match you on price, and I can match you on how many thread counts are on the sheets in the hotel. But what it's like is a point of strategic differentiation that's hard to beat.
I'd like to come back to the question of strategy in a bit, but what you said reminded me of something really fascinating that I read right at the beginning of your book. You start with this astonishing fact that most companies are not set up to design services well. And I was wondering, why not?
Well, I think it's partly that in many respects, first of all, the discipline is relatively new. And the idea of, just in the management literature, managing services has been done by analogy with managing manufacturing for a long time. So I think that's part of it. But I think, and Patricia, pick up on this because you're really smart about it. And so much of what companies do is about organizing internal operations. But when it comes to services, the act of production is with the customer. It's not in the factory and then we hand it to the customer. So the act of production has you're right there with me when it happens.
The customer is co-creating the experience. One thing we like to say is products are about handoffs. Services are about handshakes. A service requires the participation of both parties. And that is a very different thing than what we know about products and manufacturing. And that's why there has been so little written about it. And also the shift in our economy is now such that 80% of our economy is services-based. Now, recognize that that is everything other than agriculture, manufacturing, and mining. So that really is just about everything people have multiple interactions with every day, whether it's B2B, B2C, whether it's something mundane, getting a cup of coffee, whether it's something really important, calling your insurance company. I mean, I can't even imagine how hard it must be for the insurance companies right now to try to deliver good customer experiences to the poor people in Texas.
Right.
And people so often confuse customer service with customer experience. And those are two very, very different things. Customer service is something you do. Usually it's designed around when something has gone wrong. Customer experience is the totality of my interaction with you. From the moment I first come across your name, whether I Google, a service that I'm looking for, whether someone...
see an ad on television, yeah.
To when I'm done, whenever our business is finished.
So, you hear a lot about things like design thinking these days, or industrial design, manufacturing design, or designing user experiences. How do you separate service design from some of these other buzzwords that you hear about design? And is that helping or hurting the
I wouldn't separate them, I'd
situation?
integrate them. I mean, but I think that's one of the things that's interesting. And in fact, Tim Brown of IDEO, when we were talking to him, said that if you think about it, the ATM, which is 50 years old this year, was one of the first cases where people had to design in a thoughtful way how the customer interacted with, in this case, the user interface of an ATM. Before that, the user interface of the bank was, the smiling teller behind the cage, and that person did all the touching and computer, all the work with the bank systems. So design thinking is a way of approaching problems. Industrial design is a way, of course, of making beautiful and functional designs. And service design takes design thinking and takes some of the same sort of aesthetic, if you will, of industrial design, but says, how do we use that to apply to this train journey, this ATM experience, this, what are we trying to convey with the look and feel of what's happening in our interaction in the store, in the office, or whatever it might be.
And actually, something we include in service design is also service delivery, because design without the ability to execute on it is really meaningless.
That's part of that handshake. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
So, in the course of the researching and writing the book, which are some of the companies that you encounter that are really good at this? Could you offer some examples, and what can others learn from from the way they went about this exercise?
I think there were many terrific companies that we wrote about, ranging from, strict services companies, a company like Weber Shandwick, which was a PR and strategic communications company, to Warby Parker, UPenn, started by UPenn alums, with the eyeglasses. But one of the classic examples we use to explain service design really quickly is Starbucks versus Dunkin Donuts. Who's a Starbucks person? Who's a Dunkin Donuts person? And people usually have a very strong preference, and ostensibly they're both selling the same thing. They're selling coffee. But that's really not what they're selling. They're selling two very different experiences. Dunkin is a grab and go. There's a reason the slogan is America runs on Dunkin. The logo is very hot pink, hot green. Starbucks is much more designed about being relaxed and leisurely. It's not for the person who wants to get up and go. And there were new companies like Stitch Fix, which even since we wrote the book has evolved. At the time that we were doing the book, it only did women's clothing. It now includes men. Edmunds, the car buying service, which has evolved so much. They're a great example of a company that has just kept on evolving. They started as, almost a blue book.
Yeah.
Kind of
We also looked at an airline, Surf Air, which is a subscription, all you can fly air service on the West Coast in California. We looked at a hospital system, ThedaCare, in northern Wisconsin. Some of the trickiest. I mean, we all know how badly the design of medical care services is, and these guys applying the Toyota production system have actually redesigned hospital service. So we looked across a whole spectrum, but the Starbucks Dunkin example is wonderful. We even were talking to an audience in Seattle once and asked for show of hands, who's a Dunkin person, who's a Starbucks person. One person, I'm a Dunkin person. But if you think about it, it's really interesting. At Starbucks, the seating is laid back, and at Dunkin, there are little stools if there's anything at all. So these are examples of how you're selling coffee. You're selling better than average coffee, but what you're doing is creating two very different experiences, and people are in one camp or the other. There are not very many people who say whichever is closest. They have a preference, and that preference is because the experience is different, and it's designed that way very, very consciously on both sides.
I think one of the fun things that we also discovered, intuitively we believed this, but our research bore it out, was that the principles of service design hold across whether it's B2B, B2C, and across industries.
I'm glad you mentioned the principles, because that's exactly what I wanted to come to next. So you identify among all the examples that you gave that there are some common principles that these companies seem to follow, which makes them good at designing effective services or service experiences. And you start with...
you take the odd numbers and I'll take the even.
Okay.
There are five.
There are
Yes.
5 of them.
All right.
And you start with the first, which is that the customer is always right, but you have to make sure the customer is right for you.
Yes.
So could you...
Well,
let's
because
talk about that.
Because there's this idea, it's one of the first cliches anyone who's ever worked in a shop in service of any kind hears, that the customer is always right. And you know, something that's really not true. If I go to McDonald's, I have no business asking for a hamburger medium rare. That's not what they are designed to do. I am the wrong customer. Maybe just at that moment, there are times I'm perfectly happy to go to McDonald's and get what's on the menu. But if I want something very specific and custom made, that's not the place for me to go. If I want a luxury shopping experience, I should not go to TJ Maxx. Just as if I'm looking for a bargain, I shouldn't go to Barney's. So in those circumstances, I'm not the right customer. And it is incumbent upon both the customer and the company to ensure, and that's part of that co-creation we were talking about, is first of all, companies have to do 2 things. They have to decide who the right customer is and be diligent about serving those customers well. And they also have to be good about communicating who they are. And that's with everything from their branding to the way they look, to the experience that you have when you go on their website, or whether you go into their store, the people you encounter. You know, there's a very different feel when you walk into a Hyatt Regency versus an Andaz, which is another Hyatt brand. Andaz is their hip, sleeker brand where everyone's sort of dressed in black and someone's going to check you in with an iPad. You go into the Hyatt Regency and there's going to be a big ornate desk and, people in sort of old-fashioned uniforms. And those are 2 different experiences. If I'm looking for this sleek hip, I want to feel so cool, I shouldn't be at the Hyatt Regency. I'll get a very different kind of experience. It'll be a luxury experience, but it'll be very different. So customers then also have to understand what they are buying. And they need to understand that they need to recognize whether or not they are the right customer in a given situation.
So what you just said reminds me a lot of some very interesting research that has been going on at Wharton in the marketing department, led by Professor Pete Fader, on customer centricity.
Who we interviewed for the book.
Yeah, and he actually he makes that point that, customer centricity partly depends on your own center of gravity, too, that you want to find the right thing. I mean, we were talking to some people in one professional services firm, actually, and we did a mini survey of some professional services firms. And one of the things they said is a big problem is that they are lured from their sweet spot by clients who ask them to do things that aren't really, because they want to be customer-centric, but they're sort of getting the customers putting them on the wrong foot. And it's hard to say no. Our second principle, which is don't surprise and delight, just delight, is sort of expands or sort of is another turn of the crank around that idea. And one of the things we realized is that people say surprise and delight, surprise and delight. Surprise. What are you? Our point is focus on delight, and delight is meeting expectations every time. Now, if you want to put a, maraschino cherry on top of the sundae, fine, but get the sundae right. And the problem with that surprise and delight thing is it starts putting the monkey on the individual employee's back, and it doesn't focus on reliably, robustly delivering on those promises that you make and that your customer expects. I think it's Francis Fry at Harvard Business School who's
now at Uber.
That's right. Who says that that if you're doing this, you're creating sort of you're almost institutionalizing the inability to do what your customers expect constantly. And so that's our second principle.
Should we talk about the third principle?
The third principle is great service should not require heroics either on the part of the employee or the customer. So this then is an extension of what you were just talking about. So it's about consistency. And when I'm delivering a service, so now I'm in the company's seat, I need to know what I'm doing, and I should be able to do it reliably, repeatably, scalably, and profitably. And when you start requiring the heroics, it means that something has gone wrong with the design. Look, I'm not talking about emergency situations. Of course you deal with emergency situations. But if you find yourself constantly running around, like the fire alarm has just gone off, something is wrong. You were either not designing your services properly, you're not communicating the expectations appropriately to the customers, or you are being lured away from your sweet spot. And then that's a strategy problem. So these heroics are an indication to you of something's wrong. Now, from the customer's perspective, it should not be impossible for me to get what you promised me. And again, when you see consistent customer complaints, that's also a signal to you. We call those, we have moments. That moment is, when a customer knows that they're in good hands and they know that they're in your hands.
You contrast those with ow moments.
The ow moments are, the ow moments are the things that companies need to look at. Those are the things that customers complain about. And that is a signal that something is wrong. Either for some reason you're attracting the wrong customers, or you don't have your services designed in such a way that it's easy for customers to get what they want, need, and have a right to expect from you.
Yeah. And are you easy to do business with, right? I mean, it's a simple question, and most companies don't actually systematically ask it.
And what is an aha moment?
An aha moment is when I get it. I, as the seller, say, aha, I know how this works. I see the pain point. I see the aha moment. I know how to fix the pain point. I know how to create the aha moment. I understand what we're trying to do here and how to design it. This is getting complicated in a world of omni-channel on the one hand. This is the fourth principle.
That's the fourth principle.
The fourth principle is that you've got to be able to deliver to your clients or customers at every point on the journey and in every channel. So whether I'm on the web, on the phone, in their store, it should feel like I'm in your hands. And this, what people are now sometimes trying to call even a post-channel world, is critical. And we see all kinds of companies screwing up. And in some cases, it's because, by the way, they're still dealing with old computer stacks and the middleware isn't very good. Sometimes it's simply a technical issue. Sometimes it's an issue of silos and failure to make handoffs. Classically, for a long time, it's been an issue of the analog guys and the web guys who just don't connect. And that's complicated even more because it's not just the stuff under my control as a seller, but in service environments, I'm usually working in an ecosystem. Right? It's bad enough what the airlines can do to me, but then add TSA, the airports, the traffic, the transportation system to the airport. There's a whole ecosystem built around these things. And so even one of the biggest challenges in service design is to work with ecosystem partners where you may not have authority, but to try to sort of collectively work together to create an experience that you all want to create for the customers you want to serve.
And should we talk about the fifth principle?
The fifth principle is you're never done.
Yes.
And that's really important because it's not a static thing. People's expectations will change, products will change, markets will change, your strategy will change, and you've got to adapt to those things. And there's a fine line between you're never done and, as we were saying, distorting yourself outside your sweet spot so that you're no longer recognizable as to who you are. And that's why it really does come down to service design needs to be part of the strategic fabric of the company. All these decisions about service, too often as we say, it's lumped in with customers, the customer service department, which is not sufficient, or people think of it only as a function of marketing. And marketing is certainly a department that has responsibility for helping to create the notion of what that brand promise is. But strategy is about deciding what that brand promise is going to be.
There's another thing about this innovation point, which is that it's another difference between products and services, right? In products, it's Gyro Gearloose in the lab with the white coat, and innovation takes place in a place, generally, in a lab. But in services, innovation can take place all across the value chain. So how do you manage it? How do you keep it coherent so they're not running off in different directions? And how do you sort of give these sort of innovation skills to people who may not actually think of themselves as being innovators? So that's a really interesting organizational and strategic question, is the management of innovation in services, which is different from that in products.
I wonder if we could now dive more deeply into the relationship you see between strategy and service design. How can doing service design well help you develop a really strong competitive strategy that can take you forward?
We created in the book a set of 9 archetypes. And they're basically expressions of value propositions. So one of the archetypes is the trend setter. We are the Apple of whatever industry is. Another is the bargain. We're the Walmart of whatever industry is. Another is the classic. We're the best. We're the Mercedes of, the Cadillac of, whatever it is. And there are 9 of them, and you can find almost all of them in every industry. But if you think about these archetypes as expressions of a value proposition, that means they are actually sort of they're a strategy. Our strategy is to be the safe choice. Our strategy is to be the best, whatever it is. And these sort of help you envision then, value proposition and strategy are pretty closely related, right? These help you envision how we're going to take that value proposition and manifest it in the experience customers have, and also in the tangible evidence of that experience, so the look and feel, the things that customers can look at and say, yes, that's what this is going to be. And I think when you're there, that's really a strategic conversation, and having one of those archetypes in mind, it helps you. Strategy is partly the art of saying no, right? What you're not doing and the customers you're not serving. And having those archetypes in mind helps you think, no, this isn't us. This is us. We can do this. And this is what it means for the organization as a whole and for the customers we seek.
Patricia, I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about what are the biggest mistakes you find companies make in coming up with service design. What did you find in your research?
Well, I will say one of the things we did do is we tried to focus a lot on the companies who were doing it right, which isn't to say that there are only happy stories out there. There are a lot of companies that aren't doing it right. But I think a few of the things that we all see just from our own experiences on a day-to-day basis is people they just don't walk in the customer's shoes, literally. Try to be your own customer. That's part of how you find out if you're easy to do business with. People just don't think it through. Crazy things that you'll see that just make no sense. That why do I have to walk from here to there to get something done when logic would flow that I need to only go from here to there? It's not even about all the things I'm going to do from here to there. It's just a waste of my time. They also, again, they're not firm enough about their strategy. And I think the biggest mistake, though, and I think this is one of the really fundamental things we've tried to do with the book, is help companies feel empowered. I think in an age of social media, and it's too easy for customers to just go online and tweet, I've had a really bad experience with X and such, and then somebody in customer service goes, oh my God, we better reach out to this person because there's going to be, what if this goes viral? Companies need to feel empowered to be able to make these strategic decisions.
Yeah. I think Patricia's mentioned it several times. One of the biggest mistakes companies make is they confuse customer service I'm calling up, I got a problem with customer experience. And customer service is at the end, and it's important to make a good last impression, but that's failing to see the whole customer journey, and as Patricia said, to walk in the customer's shoes, and then failing to make that as coherent as possible. I think those are two of the biggest mistakes that we see companies make. Another way of looking at it is we mentioned 5 principles, and it's the violation of those 5 principles. Saying yes to everything every customer asks you to do. Not being coherent, not being innovative. Requiring heroic efforts or making your customers work too hard. Those are those principles. The flip side of those principles is what we see too darn many companies doing all the time.
And focus on surprise instead of delight.
Exactly.
I ask, why should good service be a surprise?
Right. Now, if companies want to become better at service design, what advice would you give them? How can they become better at this?
I think they need to be willing to be honest with themselves. It is a gut check, and it's not always pretty. And I think they really need to make sure that it is going into the really decision-level making of the organization.
Mm-hmm. We created a little equation in Woo, Wow, and Win, and that's that customer delight is the product of the customer's experience and technical excellence, experience times excellence. And we put 5 points under each one of those things, empathy and engineering and the economics of it, and created a quiz. I mean, you can a report card. So I think being honest with yourself sometimes requires, let's sit down and audit. And that report card is a way to audit. And you can sit down and you can take it within your management team, take it with a diagonal slice of the organization, ask some of your customers or clients to rate you, and then you can get a report card. And from there, you can begin to say, this is what's wrong. Another thing is this idea of charting the customer journey. Have we looked at that journey and what's going to happen? What is my customer experiencing at each point? What do we want the whole journey to be like? The classic, the bargain. What do we want the whole journey to be like? And what's happening at the key moments along that? If you can do those 2 things, audit and map,
and
you're going to have a good start.
And when you're mapping, you have to map both on stage and off stage, if you will. Yeah, right. What the customer sees, what the customer experiences, and then what's happening off stage to make that possible.
Or to screw it up.
Yes. As I say, I like to focus on the positive.
Well, let's have one last question. That is, are there any questions that you wanted to answer in this book but you didn't get to? So what's coming up next now that you've done this?
I think something we realized is that the principles also apply internally as strongly as they do externally. Mm-hmm. And I think it will be really interesting to explore it from the inside perspective as opposed to the outside perspective, because your employees are stakeholders as well. This is focused mostly on the external stakeholders, but I think we'd like to focus some more on the internal stakeholders and creating how to create a good service culture.
Yeah, and Gene Meister is doing some interesting stuff on the employee experience. And if you think about the employee experience and the customer experience, and think about that point that Patricia made, that services are handshakes. So an employee or a group of employees is interacting. So looking at those 2 sides, a culture that creates a great experience and a great experience that then feeds off of that, I think that's something that we would like to learn a lot.
In fact, you might find that one leads to the other.
Precisely.
Companies that have very happy employees will automatically
make
the customers
service,
happy too.
That old research on the service value chain suggests that. And then if you think about that in conjunction with this idea of experience, that gives you a whole new way to think about that classic insight.
Well, Tom, Patricia, thank you so much for speaking with Knowledge at Wharton about your book.
This has been a great experience, Nicole.
Yes, exactly. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.